Also erstmal Hallo zusammen an den Bildschirmen zu Hause oder wo auch immer. Eine Besonderheit der heutigen Veranstaltung ist, dass sie auf Englisch stattfinden wird. Deshalb werde ich jetzt auch direkt auf Englisch fortfahren. So, a real warm welcome to all students, our guests and my colleagues. And I think also from Los Angeles, Jane Brockner and Dr. Jeremy Wasser from Gallery Pluto joined in. So also a welcome to you too. For all who don't know me, I'm a professor for transdisciplinary fine arts at the design campus in Trier, which means I offer courses where students from all 6 design departments work together theoretically and practically on fine art projects. And I see these courses at the design campus as a great chance for trial and error in a kind of closed feedback loop. And especially in relation to the environment, I hope art courses can offer new viewing angles, ideas, and actions. And of course, a very important part of this is creating exhibitions. So I'm really happy that this evening with Dr. Claudia Banz, a curator from Berlin, and Barbara Benish, an artist from Los Angeles, we can welcome 2 true experts in these fields. I have the honor to introduce Barbara Benish, and my colleague, Professor Theo Smeets, will introduce you to Dr. Claudia Banz. Now, like in the talks before, we will see presentations of our guests, but during the preparation for this talk, we realized that Claudia and Barbara not only have a lot to say and show about their respective practices, but also have a great deal of shared values and views and a lot to discuss. So we decided to keep the presentations short and give more room for conversation with the possibility for you all to join in. And now a few words about Barbara. She's a truly interdisciplinary artist and activist who now for almost 40 years is working on art projects that are in close relation to environmental and social issues. Apart from that, for 10 years, she ran her own clothing fashion company and is the founding director of Art Mill, an art and education center in Bohemia in the Czech Republic. I just got to know Barbara recently due to a project she will realize at Gallery Pluto in Bonn, which is a small exhibition space I'm also involved in. And the project there is called Rhine River Requiem, but I guess Barbara will talk a bit more about that in her presentation. Just to give you an idea how active she is and how broad her art practice, I want to mention a few bullet points from her CV. From 1972 till 1979, she studied at Instituto de Bellas Artes in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and completed her BA in Fine Arts and Ethnology at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. She had a 1-year scholarship at the Art Academy in Stockholm and completed her MFA in California at Claremont Graduate University. And she mentioned that there she really enjoyed that there was a possibility to also look into other faculties or subjects, for example, philosophy or social sciences. Barbara was featured in many solo and group exhibitions, really too much to mention all here. So I will just name a few which happened at important institutions or had really cool titles. So in 1992, yeah, okay. I think someone was raising the hands. Are there any questions already? So of course you're free to pose some questions. No, okay, I think it's clear. Okay, so one of her shows I want to mention happened in 1992. The title was The Tree of the Middle Place. And this was actually a boathouse mural in Echo Park, Los Angeles. So you can see Barbara is also an artist who not only works in museums or institutions, but I think for her it's also important to go out and show her work in the kind of real world. So another show I want to mention happened in 1993 called Sleepless Night at MoMA Piers 1 in New York. And for the ones who don't know Piers 1, it's a kind of satellite space of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where more maybe young or cutting edge art shows happen. She also participated in the Venice Biennale in 2001 with the project Makers. And in 2015, she had a show at Yale University, New Haven, with the nice title From Revelations to Songs. Another show was Picasso is Female at Galerie Navratil in Prague. And 2017, she had a show called I Am Migration at Art Mill Barn Gallery in the Czech Republic. Barbara is also very active as a presenter and lecturer. So presentations and lectures include 1988, Art and Revolution at the US Embassy in Prague, or for example, 2007, on non-hierarchical exhibition practices at the University of California in Santa Cruz. So again, Barbara, we are really happy to have you here tonight. And now I want to give the word to you.
Thank you very much, Jörg. That was a great introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Jeremy and Jane at Gallery Pluto for putting us all together and connecting us. And I'm so delighted to have met Claudia and all of you. So I'll just dive right in because I know our time is a little short. So I'm going to screen share with you if it works. I have a lot of images, but I talk fast, so excuse my California accent. I hope everyone can understand. If you don't, just raise your hand. So I wanted to, as Jörg said, I did have a wide and varied background, but I did study fashion design actually for a couple of years. And as he mentioned, had a clothing business. So I know some of you are design students, and I wanted to kind of focus a little bit, going back and forth with Claudia later on textiles and how that's influenced my work and what that means to me. So I think the installation that will be hopefully happening at Bonn next summer has to do with actually our bodies and textiles and the environment. And hopefully by the end of this little presentation, you will understand the connection. So I've titled it Earth, Water, and the Clothes We Wear, Decolonizing and Redesigning Materiality. So I studied years ago, I didn't want to just study art. I wanted to study ethnography too, which is the study of living people, kind of the anthropology of living people. And the one place that was closest to California, my home, was in Hawaii. So I was fortunate enough to be there during the time period when the Hawaiian Renaissance was beginning. So Hawaiians were beginning to look at colonization by the United States and how they could continue to keep their culture alive. So coming out of fashion and textiles, this will give you a little bit of idea of what happened when the missionaries arrived to Hawaii. You see the pa'u, the traditional tapa cloth that was worn before contact with the Europeans. And then on the right, you see what happened afterwards. So the Hawaiians went from a traditional indigenous hand-printed tapa woodblock cloth fabric that was completely eco-friendly, of course, to the textiles and calicos that were being made in the mills of the US and adapted. Of course, there was a religious reason for this too. The missionaries wanted to make sure their bodies were covered. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too, how important the body is and has been in my work as a female artist. So I created this piece for my thesis show. One of them is called the missionary dress. It's made of textiles, handy wipes, we call them. It's a horrible synthetic oil-based fabric that's used for washing dishes. You can buy everywhere. It's non-biodegradable, and it's one of the things that actually adds to the microbeads that we'll be talking about later in plastic pollution that's in our oceans. So I sewed this kind of faux missionary dress and hand stamped it with woodblock prints that were actually taken from ancient tapa cloth patterns. So it's kind of a recreation, a cleansing, if you will, of the indigenous culture of what happened when the Europeans and Americans arrived. So this is, I thought for you students, this might be interesting. This is my thesis show many, many years ago at University of Hawaii. And so I was, you know, and in dialogue with Professor Claudia's work. It was an examination of high and low art, of what we call fine arts and crafts. So if we look at indigenous cultures, sometimes we lump them into craft, and we have elevated Western art to high art or fine art. So it looked at, I used the European style of oil painting, breaking it up in a kind of Picasso Cubist style to echo and reflect actually what is happening in traditional tapa patterns throughout Polynesian. So the Hawaiians were masters at tapa, still are. Throughout Polynesia, you'll see these patterns which are echoing natural forms. You have the worms, the snakes, the movement of the hula dance, which was integral to their culture. This is the sea urchin pattern. It's a little creature in the ocean with the spikes and creates a purple dye that they actually used in the tapa cloth. So I reproduced these on the oil paintings, these sea urchin patterns, and then placed these designs into the actual oil paintings that were representing how the native people would make that. So this is a fisherman from the back, he's fishing, capturing the sea urchins in his net. So it's kind of this full cycle of production and material in ancient and traditional cultures. And then later in the 90s, I began to actually bring the natural fabrics, the natural objects, the material into my work. So there was no separation anymore from the two-dimensional and the three-dimensional. And this is what installation art does, is that it starts to break down the borders between our experience of the artwork. So it's in the space, it works with the history of the space sometimes. And these sculptures became more like environments themselves than just traditional sculptures, or that was my goal anyway. So I would use materials that were kind of non-permanent. My work is a nightmare for curators and museums because it's very difficult to preserve, which is part of the work, is that it biodegrades or becomes, goes back to where it came from. This series, it was called Sandcastles. They're giant flowers, shapes or forms that were cast in concrete, very heavy. And it was inspired by my children, who at that time had started to play at the beach and build sandcastles. So in the space, the poor curator helped me bring in 2 tons of sand from the beach. So again, we were bringing the nature into the gallery space. And then eventually I took the sculptures out to the beach. So it was that, again, that crossing of the boundary between what is a gallery space, what is a museum, and what is the natural environment, and how we as the audience can experience that. These had actual living flowers in them and plant forms, and they have on the back water capsules, so they could actually live for quite some time. And then eventually the sculptures completely move outdoors and become part of the environment themselves. So here you can see it full circle, returning from where it came. So I went back to the oldest sculpture that we know of, the famous so-called Venus of Willendorf, that is now in the Austrian Museum, but she actually comes from ancient Bohemia, as you probably know, as art students. And her form has fascinated, of course, the whole world and captured us because she's so beautiful. We don't actually know what she was for. Is she a fertility goddess? Is she a home goddess for the hearth? Was she to bring rain? She has scars down her face that we don't know, is she crying or is that a rain symbol? So I became fascinated with her as I was working through issues of my body and our bodies and how they relate to the environment. So I broke her down into these wire sculptures that created this kind of Plato's cave, if you will, this echo of themselves. So we don't know where her physical body is and which one is real, if it's the one on the wall that's reflected by the light, or if it's the actual body herself. And then I played with these in larger installations, which created this whole atmosphere that you go into with video projections of the environment. So eventually this Venus figure turned into, I created these cast sculptures in glass, and it became abstracted. So she becomes more of a tool, perhaps, or an object, a fetishized object. And at this time I was working a lot with a campaign with the United Nations on hazardous chemicals and waste, where I learned a lot about the environmental effects on our body. So I was interested to be able to try and bring that information to the public in some way that would inform and inspire us without just scaring us, because it's so difficult, these issues. And this installation, it's called Body Burden, which you might have heard of. That's an issue of how we measure the actual chemicals in our bodies today, which each and every one of us now has over 34 chemicals in our bodies when we are born. So each generation, it's a cumulative, depending on where you live, but it's not, we now know that these chemicals are actually in the fetus, in the mother's womb. So these are because of our environment, and now it's genetically passed down. So this installation, brought that view of the body in our environment with another installation you can see in the background about plastic. And I know and have worked with many artists who are working in plastic pollution now. It's a very popular genre. And it's a great way to raise awareness about plastic in our oceans and in our rivers and in our landfill. But that said, after doing this for so many years, I wonder how we can actually change the dialogue about plastic pollution, that if we just keep recycling, it's not enough, both recycling of plastic and recycling our ideas about not using plastic. How can we get to the core of what that desire is? And I think part of it, in what I tried to look at in this installation, it's called ubiquity, which of course means all present. And I wanted to take one object like these plastic chairs, which are designed and manufactured in the United States and have now gone all over the world. They do not biodegrade. We see them everywhere. I think they're terribly ugly, but there is a certain beauty to this plastic that's been created, this form. And so if we begin to look at the aesthetics behind that beauty, why is it compelling to us to buy this new, shiny, pretty plastic? So in this sculpture, I created video presentations that have images of plastic pollution in the oceans from my friends who are doing research out. The Five Gyres Institute has been one of the early researchers on this here in California. Captain Charles Moore, shout out to him, who actually saw the first great garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean and brought awareness to us now over 20 years ago. So these images you could see from underneath the chairs, if you looked, the plastic caught in the fishing nets, etc. And then this final piece was, I call Swan, because it's actually so elegant and quite beautiful, like a swan flying. But I want the viewer to try and think on a deeper level about what it is that's so attractive about these objects that we keep creating and bringing into our life. So the swan, of course, has been a motif in my work for many years. Everyone knows the story, the Greek myth of Leda and the swan. And we have at Art Mill, our center in Bohemia, we have a lake right on the edge of the mill. It's an old mill. And we've had hunters coming for many years to try and it's a business, but anyway, we've been fighting these hunters for a long time because they're so close to where we have students and we have people. And we staged a protest against the hunters coming to shoot because they killed 2 swans. And then I created this mural on the wall of Art Mill. And I'm happy to say that we stopped the hunters for now, and the baby swans have come back to the lake. So I just wanted to throw this in as a piece about how art can leave the gallery spaces and become an active creator for social change or environmental change. I started a series on the maps of the 5 gyres in the oceans that are actually creating these islands of plastic, which we now know are even deep into the ocean floor. And I made these maps into placemats, which we took to the Venice Biennale one year and handed them out to different places like McDonald's, where people would be able to actually get some information about plastic pollution without actually knowing about it. And then just to end up here a little bit, the history of Native Americans in this country has been, as you know, a genocidal history, which the story has not been completely told yet. It's beginning to become more public now. So I've been very involved with some of the indigenous people of the Americas, working to try and bring this to a more public, the history that happened. So this is a piece called Manifest Destiny. It's on a hide that actually repeats the roads that were used for travel and trade between the different tribes. And now these are the major highways and railroads of the United States. So it's talking about how we build on culture. As difficult as those histories are, culture is built one upon the other, either in a creative and mutually agreeable way or an extractive way. So via my daughter, who's about your age, she's 25 now and a pretty activist, environmental activist, we were at Standing Rock. It was a pipeline protest in 2017 that went kind of global. And the issue, of course, was water. How do we keep clean water if there's a pipeline going across the lands? And it's also about Indigenous rights. This was mainly on the reservation at Standing Rock. And the Lakota people have a myth that they say it was a prophecy that one day the black snake will come, and that's the oil line. And they talk about when the black snake comes, that all the tribes, all the peoples will come together, which happened at Standing Rock. There were thousands and thousands of people at this protest for many, many months. So I created this work for a gallery last fall called Black Snake. And it's looking at our addiction to oil. And so there was a bag that hung on these beautiful images of the local trees. It's a forest of beech trees that surround this castle. And the oil slowly drips and creates oil paintings. And then I'll end with this beautiful designs. I had the opportunity to go to Cameroon a few years back and was very inspired by not only the textiles, but the forms and the patterns, the materiality of, this is their ancestor figure in the center of the plaza of the royal palace. And she's from the 13th century, was their leader, the matriarchal leader. And you can see that the patterns from the royal palace on the left, these are the rock patterns on the floor made by hand, and the patterns of this is the one royal textile they have that they use for special occasions, that it duplicates this kind of womb or uteral form actually into the textiles. So for this final piece I did recently called Things Fall Apart, taken from a famous book by a Nigerian writer who talks about when cultures disintegrate, and it can happen to any of us. And I thought during the pandemic, this would be particularly poignant. So, and also our hierarchical systems of the geopolitical situation. So we have the ladder, and then there's the agricultural plow. And this was a large wall of drawings that were blown up into posters. So you have different tools and forms that are used in agriculture and culinary uses. And I'll end with this to bring in the last piece. This was in Prague on the river Vltava, and it was a sculpture of that I call Tower. And we filled it with electronic waste. It was for the public to come and deposit their old computers or iPhones. And then we had an exchange with Prague Zoo that each one would get a refund, and that money would go towards protecting habitat in Africa for the gorillas. Because as you know, all the chemicals in our iPhones are from the jungles of Africa that are destroying the gorilla habitat. So for Pluto Gallery in Bonn, I hope on the river there, the River Rhine, we can create a piece that's going to be, I'm proposing about 12 or 15 old washing machines stacked on top of one another that would create a fountain. So the issue being the microplastics that we all have in our clothing, we now know about, that are actually going back into our water systems. So if they're not 100% organic clothing, those little microfibers are creating microbeads that then go into our rivers, which empty into our oceans, because it all goes downhill. So the series of paintings is actually looking at those microbeads, which are really pretty under a microscope, but not pretty when they get into our water system. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you, and look forward to talking more.
Thanks, Barbara, for the great presentation. And yeah, I think I would hand it over immediately to you, Theo.
Also for me, thank you very much, Barbara, for the insight in your professional praxis. Very exciting. We're going to switch to Claudia Banz. She is a curator at the moment in Berlin. We got in contact about 5-6 years ago. Claudia Banz is one of the few curators in Germany who really take care about jewelry. And I mean, this is also maybe the time to introduce myself. I forgot this. I wrote over my paper short introduction. So my name is Theo Smeets. I'm a professor for jewelry design at Campus Ida Oberstein. And this is in fact also the connection to Claudia Banz. As said, she was is a curator that takes care of jewelry as well, not only of design. She has been working in Hamburg. That was the point where we met. At the moment, she is working in Berlin. Claudia Banz is an art historian. She makes exhibitions and she writes. She's an author. She is the curator of design at the Kunstgewerbemuseum in Berlin. And I think this is at the moment it is the biggest museum for applied art in Germany. And previously she was in Hamburg, as said. There she realized numerous exhibitions. She had kind of outreach formats and fairs at the intersection of design, fashion, crafts and art. She organized projects like Fast Fashion, The Dark Side of Fashion, Food Revolution 5.0, Design for Tomorrow's Society, or Connecting Afro Futures, Fashion times Hair times Design. With these works, she focuses on sustainability, resources, responsibility, consumption, and decolonial design. For the Kunstgewerbemuseum in Berlin, she established the Design Lab series, which we in Ida Oberstein are very pleased about because we are invited to take part next year. She opened this Design Lab series to open the museum as a platform and an experimental space for multidisciplinary design approaches. This sounds, of course, very modern, but that is not as automatically done as it says, because I think museums are in a special position. I'm very happy with one small sentence that Jörg said in his introduction of Barbara. She said that besides working with museums, she also gets in contact with the real world and makes art. And I think this is very interesting that tonight we can really connect these two kind of universes, but see that they are not separated at all. And this is one of the reasons why we really invited also Claudia Banz for this series of lecture, because the position of the museum is not only to preserve what has been going on in the past, but also there is developing a very good and important way to confront the audience, us, the people, with what is going on in society. So the museum becomes more and more, instead of a cupboard where we keep our old stuff, into a place of conversation that confronts us with developments that we as a society and we as the people are going through. One of the things Claudia is doing this with is with the design labs. For instance, at the moment, there is a design lab called Material Loops, Paths to the Circular Future. With every exhibition, there's also a small publication, so you can look at these exhibitions online. You can also get the publications to see these positions. They are, by the way, often done by students from universities and academies. Another laboratory was design lab number 7 called Talk to Me, Questioning the Collection. This was in fact a self-critique or a critique on the position of the museum. And then Atmoism, Design Atmospheres in 2020. Design lab number 8 is, as I said, Material Labs, Paths to a Circular Future. Okay, I think that describes a little bit of all the things you have been doing until now. I don't want to have the mic too long, and I'm very eager to hear and excited to hear your lecture for us, Claudia. You have the word.
Yeah, thank you very much, Theo, for this wonderful introduction. I think you already said everything, so there is not much to add from my side. So hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. And yes, we had a very intensive discussion already, Barbara and me, before we started. And there are many shared interests. So as Theo said, I'm not an artist, but I'm a curator. And when you read my title, it sounds very solid. And I'm not so happy with this title, but I was forced to send one. So what I'm not going to do is to talk about what I call the hardware of green museums. So I'm not going to talk of architecture and the sustainable issues relate to. I'm not going to talk about mobility in terms of business trips and loans, and I'm not talking about conservation of the objects, since I'm not a restaurator, but as said, I'm a curator, and I would like to talk about my agenda. I'm a classical art historian, and yeah, it happened by chance that now I'm curator for design. And since the beginning of my studies, I was always very much interested in the interrelationship between art and society. I was more interested in the context of art pieces, how they are produced, how they are collected, how they are perceived. And so the same applies to design. I'm more interested in the context of design and more interested in the people who designing. I'm very much, of course, interested in responsibility, all this big notion of responsibility, and of course of sustainability. When we talk about sustainability, we mostly forget one important pillar, because in fact sustainability has 3 pillars, and one is the ecological pillar, then we have the economical pillar, and we also have the social pillar. And the photo I'm showing here is from Taslima Akhtar, and she's an activist from Bangladesh. And she took this photo as one of many after the horrible accident at Rana Plaza, which you might remember. It really ran through the media. And although it was not the first accident, and you remember that more than 1,000 textile workers, mostly women, died. And yeah, so these images and the whole accident went through the press. And yeah, in fact, Rana Plaza is a place where not only fast fashion was produced, but also the so-called middle class segment of fashion. And then I thought, okay, I'm working in a museum. At that time, I was still working in Hamburg, and we have a huge fashion collection, the most beautiful dresses from also contemporary designers. And we all fashion addicted, and we all love the glamorous side of fashion, but we never look. At that time, it was in 2013, we don't look really at the backside, so at the dark side of fashion. And that was the initial moment when I decided, hey, we should also do an exhibition on the dark side of fashion. And this was the exhibition Fast Fashion. And I decided to do an exhibition without fashion, which at that time was very unusual. And my goal was really to create awareness, to raise awareness concerning the production side. Who is paying the true costs? Who is the real fashion? Who are the real fashion victims? What is the ecological impact of fashion? And along the textile chain. And so we had like 3 chapters. It was about the consumerism, and it was about ecological questions, and it was also about economical questions. And when you are doing exhibitions, you all know that you have a certain budget, and you invest a lot of time, a lot of research, and then you show, most of the time you show your exhibition one time. So this is also not very sustainable. And with fast fashion, we decided from the very beginning that it should become an exhibition who could travel. So this means that we also had to think about a certain exhibition architecture. And we also decided to add a laboratory, because when you're in a museum, you all know you have not the permission to touch anything. And so we created this slow fashion lab. The exhibition itself was really on creating awareness, and people were very frustrated when they saw this exhibition. And it was really like 5 years ago, as I said. And then they were very happy to see, okay, there are solutions. There are design solutions in terms of materials, and also in terms of new approaches. I know that are many fashion designers amongst you. So meanwhile, within the last 5 years, there has changed a lot, but at that time it was really at the very beginning. As Theo already mentioned, I always try to also inform the public and not to do this heavy coffee table books, but really try to to think about small like magalogs like this one, and really to sell them for a cheap price. So it was like €5 you could buy this magalog, and you had all the information, because we also created infographics. So this is very important for me also to provide information. We were happy with the support of the Goethe Institute to send this fast fashion exhibition abroad, and in fact to send it to the places where fast fashion is produced. And this gives you just a view of the opening of fast fashion in Manila. And we were also happy to show it in Jakarta, in Indonesia. It also traveled to Australia, and it was shown also in Europe. And in total, this exhibition was shown like 8 times. So this was in that sense also a very sustainable exhibition. Another topic I'm very concerned with is food. And I also, created an exhibition on this huge topic of food. And in between, I moved to Berlin. And I don't know whether you are aware of the architecture of the museum in Berlin. It's not very sustainable, by the way. And we have this huge beton piazzetta in front of the museum, which is never used, which is a hotspot for skaters, but for the rest, it's just an empty space. And so I invited a Dutch designer and say, look, take this space and do something in terms of urban gardening. And this was his installation of an urban, I don't know the English word, I forgot it. It's a Streuobstwiese. And so with apple trees, and you can sit there, but it's also, you see, it has a kind of negative aspect, because these apple trees, they have this, you see these little bags with water inside. So it's very hard to survive for nature in between these concrete buildings. I also tried to get my colleagues, because in their private time, they are really sincere gardeners, and I invited them to create an urban garden. We have a lot of terraces. As I said, our building is really a bit difficult, and this is another ugly, empty terrace. And I invited students from the Technical University in Berlin to create this urban garden. And my idea was really that we would sit for lunchtime or after work, and we would create our own salads, and we would bring our food, and we would have like sustainable food and sustainable meals. But unfortunately, it didn't really work out. So we had to move this garden after the end of the exhibition. What I also try to engage people to raise awareness is to do performances. This is a performance in another little area in our museum. So we have an inner court, and this is a performance by the well-known design duo Kmara Rusinke, who created this mobile kitchen. And they were at that time doing a performance with ginger. And and this is also for a museum, it's not normal to have food within the museum during an opening. It's mostly forbidden. But of course, food is always a good opportunity to talk about important issues, in this case related to food. This is another performance. I invited the Italian designer Giulia Soldati, and she did this nice performance in which she teach us how to eat with our hands and how to, she wanted to raise awareness that we lost our sensitivity towards food and then we should use our hands. And in fact, this was this, we had like mozzarella and tomatoes and oil, but it came all in separate steps. So this was a very nice performance. As I said, I'm very much interested in social issues, and this was Design Lab 4, where I was very happy to invite Ezio Manzini, which you might know, whom you might know. So he's very famous for his social design, and he created the Desis network, and this was more like a reading installation, and we had a lot of films. And so this was also related to food, as you might see now. We were also happy to get Brave New Alps, which is a collective working in in Südtirol. And they brought food from the region. It was all, sustainable food. And again, another opportunity to talk with the public about food issues. So Barbara was talking about the iPhone and where the materials come from. And this was another design lab. I invited a research team from Bale, from the university in Bale in Switzerland. And they did a fantastic research on the leftovers of our iPhone. And at the left side, you can see this is one image from a video installation. As you might know, all the German electro trash is sent down to Africa. So we really don't, we just buy our new iPhones, even if we don't need the latest ones. And so this was really a very impressive installation as kind of output of this research. And there was also a lot of interactive elements, which I cannot show at the moment. And we will have a symposium which will take place next week, by the way. Times of waste handling matter. We had to postpone it. It was planned for last year, but as many events, we had to postpone it to this year. As you see, I really like to collaborate with students because I think it's also very important to learn about their way of conceiving the world and how they think about design and also how they think, for instance, about work. And this was in fact very funny because the title was set before the Corona crisis came. And it was the question, how do we want to work together as socially engaged designers, students and neighbors in neoliberal times? And the idea was really to have a festival within the museum. We already heard that museums are very solid and very heavy institutions. So this is really my aim with the Design Lab series, to open it up more into like a more easygoing gallery space or like a platform. And I would have loved the idea that the students come and kind of live for 3 weeks in the museum and really invite people to talk with them. And at the end, of course, it had to become an online festival because of Corona. And this is the current Design Lab, which we will open tomorrow evening. So you are very welcome to follow the digital opening, and it's on material. So Barbara was already talking a lot about material, and this is of course crucial. If you are designers, you know there is a huge responsibility in the choice of materials when it comes to plastic and the pollution of the oceans, or about the circularity of materials. And this, I think, is a very important issue at the moment. And this is just, I took today some shots in the actual exhibition. And what is very important for me is also when it comes to the exhibition architecture, I always try to reuse material from former exhibitions, which sounds very natural, but I can tell you this wasn't natural at least until the last year. I have to tell you, I had really heavy struggles with the housekeepers who said, oh, I have to throw away everything because there's the danger of fire. And I said, no, we have to be sustainable and we can reuse the material. And yeah, so this, as I said, is about material loops. It has like 6 chapters. It's about fashion design. It's about plastics. It's about waste. And it's about speculative design. And it's also about places of circularity. So in Berlin, there are already a lot of important places of circularity, like the Haus der Materialität or the C2C lab. So, and this is also, the lab is also a possibility for us in the museum to connect with the outer space, with the real world, and of course with experts who are already practicing circularity, because I think this is the next big issue we all have to talk about as a society. If in times of climate change and climate crisis, we of course have to talk about consumerism, we have to talk about how much, how we deal with our resources. And so I'm very curious and looking forward to this, to the outcome of this design lab. And these are just 2 images which shows you the way how I try to reuse the furniture, the exhibition furniture. So when we had the food exhibition in Berlin, I asked the exhibition designers to create a kind of exhibition furniture which I could reuse. And they created this kind of tables. And I can tell you, so this exhibition was in 2018 and I reuse them all the time, as you can see in Design Lab 4. Or we also reused parts of the structure of the food revolution. We reused in the Afro Futures exhibition. So we completed it with these big plates and we put a nice pattern on it. And now in the current Design Lab 8, you see the black plates at the back. So in fact, this is the back side of this structure which we built for the Afro Futures exhibition. So, and we invited tape artists to create a kind of information system, and they were also working with leftovers from tape material. And we really tried to set up this exhibition, this design lab, with as less resources as possible. And so to end with the invitation, tomorrow at 5 p.m. you are very welcome to join our opening of the Design Lab 8. And I'm really looking forward to, as Theo mentioned, so I invited students from Ida Oberstein, and it will be Design Lab 11. And we will open it in January. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it is very exciting every time when we have a meeting and we are talking and preparing an exhibition, or in general, I find it really almost relieving to meet somebody who is working in a place like this and really is preparing kind of a mirror and taking the responsibility to show society what is going on. And I think we have seen that your identity as a curator is almost comparable with the identity of an artist. You have to position yourself, you have to make a statement, it cannot be only about beauty and past, but it's really about social impacts of issues and making people aware of what is going on in nowadays society. And I think that museums for a lot of people in everyday life are in fact like a theater, is a place where you go to on a special occasion. And for me, it's really exciting that there are people like you who really are very active in changing the position of a museum and making it an active part of our society and our development. So thank you for that and for your lecture. We have been asking already a few times for questions, but we are going to postpone this for a few minutes still, because first of all, I would like to give our two lecturers the possibility to start with a question for each other. You have been discussing a lot, and I know there are some open issues. Please do not jump into the discussions that you have already been doing on level 43, but take in the audience. And I would first like to ask Barbara, maybe to have a first initial question for Claudia. And I think from then on, things will start rolling. If the questions come in from the audience, we will sometimes even probably have to interrupt you to give the audience space and chance to get into the discussion. So please, everybody that is in the audience, feel free to ask, use the chat, or if you want to be online as well, activate your video and take part in the discussion.
Well,
Barbara.
thank you, Theo. And that was just a great presentation, Claudia. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited that curators like you exist, because it's kind of, I was thinking as you were talking that it's like the old difference between high and low art and applied and craft and fine arts, that you're doing that with the actual space of the museum, that those hierarchies are being broken down, and that it becomes a place of really the whole culture. So I just wanted to thank you for that. So one thing I've been thinking a lot about is the word sustainability, that, as it came out in the 80s and we were embracing the word that, the United Nations took off with, that the new word of regeneration that's happening coming up from the gardeners and the food people, of course, too, and how we are creating systems that are not just sustainable, that we don't necessarily, it's too late for that now, that we need to actually be regenerative, a very active position. How do you see that? I mean, I can see with the projects you're doing that you're kind of planting seeds in your community and the society with what you're doing. Could you address that as a museum person that goes forward for the future? How do you see that?
Thank you for this question. I think this is exactly the important point. And yeah, I think as a museum person, on one hand, I'm really a bit disappointed, but I didn't mention that. But in Germany, we have this, it's called Green Museum, and it's celebrating its 10th anniversary. And I have to say, I only learned like 2 months ago that this is existing. So what I mean is that we really need to connect, and we really need to ask the right questions about, hey, it's too late, but on the other hand, we have possibilities, but, and this is for me working in the museum, I have to be careful because I don't want to do like this. Oh, sorry, I don't know how you say that in English, but too didactic.
Yeah.
But it's really pushing people into the direction of thinking, okay, it's when we read all this information in the media about climate change, etc., it seems so far away, but it's here, and it's all around us, and also the pandemic is part of this, in if you want, and I think really we have a responsibility, and I can't see the crowd which is listening to us, but I just want to say to all you students and designers, and also we as consumers and the producers and the politicians, we all have a responsibility, and we really should do something. And it can be something small, but we have to take action. And so, and I was really impressed that you mentioned that your daughter is an activist, and also you are an activist, and I think this is what we need. So like the Fridays for Future, I'm so happy that this is happening. And now there's also some colleagues from museums all over the world took Fridays for Future as an example for creating museums for future. And I'm very curious to see whether this is changing something, because all discussions before, it was like blah, 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 or we talk about sustainability, but we don't act. And I think responsibility, everybody has to take responsibility, and we have to act. And this is something I also want to transmit, you can say that in English, through the exhibitions, and also through the people I work with. They so fantastic people. And just to say that at the end, sorry, it's a long answer. Sometimes we have the feeling there is not happening that much. But as I said, this exhibition, Fast Fashion, I did it in 2014. And since then, there happens so much that's also something I wanted to ask you about fashion and textiles, what your experience is with this change in the last 5-6 years. I have the feeling that there is a lot of awareness, and there you can see, okay, it's happening something, although sometimes you have the feeling, no, there's nothing going any further. So what is your experience with?
Well, I've been fortunate through that campaign I work with the UN to actually be able, I was at the UN before the pandemic, working with a panel of young artists and designers from Africa on fast fashion. So I got this really kind of microscopic view into, how it's being promoted globally, how the dialogue's changing about, what we can buy. So it really gets down to consumption, right? So and that's where each of the individual, and as you said, all the young people out there can have an impact. It's not, these global issues start every single morning when we get up. What kind of coffee do we drink? Is it organic? Is it shade grown? What are we putting on our bodies? How are we washing our clothes? All those things. So yeah, I think there's definitely a shift. But then cost comes into it. So I always say it's not just what we do, but we have to work at this point in our history of the planet. We have to work on every level. So we've got to work governmental, neighborhood, individuals too. So yeah, I think it's very inspiring what's happening. And I think, that's always an issue for artists, and maybe you as a curator too, that like you said, we don't want to become didactic, and the work does not want to become about just messaging. And that's where I wanted, when I presented that piece about the swans, that I think aesthetics that's our language, and that is, as artists, that is one of our tools. So how do we reshape or remold aesthetics that would be able to still continue a social practice, if that makes sense? That's one issue I'm always struggling with and trying to be aware of.
Okay, I think we just got a first question from the audience. Let's jump to that one. It's Lisa O'Rourke. I will read her question to Claudia Banz. Claudia, do you know if other curators or museums are reusing their museum architecture? And if there is any exchange of materials between the museums?
Yes, so I think that can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really starting that curators become aware of this I would say in the last 2 or 3 years. And that they also, for Germany, you might know the Bundeskulturstiftung, which is a very important institution. And they launched a project, Green Museum. So they also became aware of the fact that Green Museum does not only mean that we should not print out all our mails, but this is the notion of green is something more. And so at this, I would say since last year or since 2019, that's my feeling, but maybe you have other experiences. There is more and more awareness regarding also to reuse material or to reuse or to create it in a simple way. Because whenever you had the chance to do an exhibition, and in earlier times, we were all treated by this huge budget we had. And then, okay, why we should save money, why we should save resources. So we just install everything and then it's done, the exhibition is over, and then just throw it away. And yeah, so it's starting. And yes, so we try, as you know now, I'm working at the State Museum. So we are a reunion of 17 museums. And we, of course, try also to share technical equipment. We try to share retreats. Well, it's, I would say, at the baby level. But I hope that in the future now, more and more colleagues also becoming aware of the fact that we have also to change our mindset in terms of building up exhibitions. And I know some museums, for instance, I used to work at the Hygiene Museum in Dresden many years ago. And from there, actually, I learned that we should take care of the exhibition architecture, because what they did, they sold it or they gave it to other institutions like schools or theaters who were not really able, because of budget restrictions, to afford a completely new architecture. And so on that level, yes, I experienced that, but I would say there is a lot, as we say in German, there is much air to the ceiling. Sorry, it's a bad translation. It's viel Luft nach oben.
Claudia, to maybe specify that question of Luisa, because I just mentioned it after your lecture. I have also the feeling that the identity of a curator is also something that you need to take care of as your personal presentation. How do you set up an exhibition? I don't want to call it a brand, but isn't this possible at every level to just pass on the architecture? To which extent would the curator really use an old exhibition in the sense of, I want to set my own brand, or I want to show a new image? To which extent is this possible? You just said the technical stuff, that is not a problem. But how about really the interior that makes out the composition of the exhibition? How do you look at that?
Well, I think it's depending on the narrative of the exhibition. In my point of view, I think you can reuse exhibition part of the exhibition architecture, because it also makes you creative and inventive. But this is my personal opinion. I really hate meanwhile. I really hate this abundance of big installations, very expensive. But I think if you really have to say something, you don't need this abundance, because then it's the object, or like Barbara doing her installations, so you don't need much she around. So, and maybe it sounds a bit polemic, but I would say the more she around, the less you have to tell. Sorry, but meanwhile, this is my opinion. So, and it's of course, yeah, how you as a curator is how you select the pieces or the installations, and as an artist also you think about how to, I mean, you could also use a lot of material, Barbara, but you don't. So I think it's a bit the same attitude, to concentrate, to focus. What do I want to tell?
Yeah.
And I think it's also, I think in design at least, because for me it's not so much on aesthetics, but it's really on context and also on information. So it's also and I really like, meanwhile, I like graphics a lot, and also infographics. So yeah, I think you could reuse it, and it makes you even more creative, and the exhibition itself becomes a new layer also.
Absolutely. I agree. I think recycled materials are the most exciting because they already have a life. They have a history, they have a narrative already, and then you can play with whatever that history is into the new context, because we don't need more objects. It's just recreating a new context, I feel.
Yeah. We have another question here, Elias Kratzheller. It's a bit of a strategical question. How would both of you go about creating awareness on sustainability, especially for people that have no interest in sustainability? Exhibitions and museums mainly reach people that are already interested in the topic, but what about the general public? Maybe first to you, Barbara, because this is not only for museums. I think art in general needs an art-loving or an art-appreciating audience. How do you get beyond this? I mean, we all have arms where we can reach a certain distance. How do we get beyond this?
Well, I think this is a really good question. It's been an issue in the art world, I think, for many years. We were talking earlier when we we're preparing this about Joseph Beuys and the great German artist who at Documenta many years ago planted the 1,000 oak trees out front of the actual building itself. So I think artists have been breaking down the walls, as have curators, and making it more interdisciplinary between the building itself and the public. So I always, in my own work, try to have a really strong outreach part of the work. So like this piece proposing now for Gallery Pluto, it's going to be in a park. It's recycle washing machines, and we hope to have a whole program around it so that people will be able to learn more about microbeads and textiles. So there's, I think I'm not the only artist. Many are working to, be able to have an experience that's outside of the museum. It's kind of like your what the public relations people say about your website and Instagram. Instagram is the road to the off-ramp, which is Facebook perhaps, and Facebook leads to your website. So it's kind of like these tentacles that you have your work out in the public, but you can bring them back to the museum, to an actual concrete space that you are able to show things in a different way with a clean white wall.
maybe I can add a second question to that, because the classical image of the artist is somebody who sits in their studio, their atelier, and they make stuff, and when it's finished, they go out into the world and try to find a place to show it. But this awareness of sustainability and handling materials immediately invites you to contact your fellow artist on quite a different way as was usual in the past. I think you are a person who has been really living this transfer, maybe also of artistic identity into more public space, into more activism. Can you say a few sentences about this, how this developed during your artistic life?
Well, I don't think it was planned, but I think art belongs in the world, and I think my early studies with Polynesian culture taught me a lot about, say, hula, the hula dance. We have this image of it's a thing on Waikiki Beach, but hula is a language. It's part of the culture. The dance in many indigenous cultures still exists as a community event. It's not just a performance. It's a spiritual, it's a physical, it's a culinary event too, with the festivals. So ceremony, I think, is something that we've lost a lot in Western culture, and ceremony is part of being in the public sphere. So while we can't recreate something artificial, I think I've tried in my work to bring it to the public in a way that would duplicate or mimic something that would be more than just my work, but it becomes an event. But I'll tell you one funny story about materials and the public is that many years ago, we live in a rural village in Bohemia in Czech Republic. And when my daughter was in kindergarten, they would take the class out for little walks. And I had my other baby, my newest baby, in the stroller. And I was at the local dump down the street looking in the garbage for new materials, because they have wonderful materials that people throw away. And I had my stroller, and my 6-year-old was walking with her school by on their class outing. And she looked over and she said, "Mama, what are you doing here?" And all of the children looked at me in the dump with the babies trying to get new materials. And I said, "Oh, just getting my art supplies." And they kept walking. So, you know, art is everywhere. It's not just something you buy in the art supply store. It's not something that just goes in rooms with closed doors. It's everywhere.
Maybe I can also now pass this same question over to Claudia. How does the museum try to enhance the arm length, the reach?
This is a very important question, and so therefore we have even created a new job description, and it's in, I don't know whether it has the same meaning in English, but in German it said curator for outreach. So this is really, I would say, the follower of the museum pedagogical Museumspädagogik and an educational program. And this is a big issue. It's really a big issue. So thank you very much, Elias, for this question. But because I think that's absolutely true. On one hand, we feel that the classical Bildungsbürger, as we say in German, is not existing any longer. So it becomes cool to go to certain museums, not to all museums. And this is, of course, also part of at least what I try, for instance, with this design lab, because it's not like a huge, solid, heavy museum exhibition, but it's more light. It's a critical platform, but it's light. We have these performances, we have talks, events. The publications are not that expensive. And I just can tell you the story that fast fashion, for instance, was super successful, I have to say, and it made me really happy. It was the only exhibition for which I received many letters, and really people telling me, and also young people, thank you, and it really changed my mindset. And if you get this kind of letter, you think, yes, thank you. And but it's a permanent question, and you never know how to reach the public. Every time you have to try anew, and there is not one solution. And yeah, sometimes I remember we had in Hamburg, we had a plastic garbage exhibition. In fact, it was a takeover from the colleagues from Zurich. And we had at the opening, there was almost no public. And we were super frustrated. But then it became at that time the most, the exhibition with the most visitors we had at that time. And then we had a lot of interesting conversations with people from Greenpeace and all these NGOs. And they said, well, this is super interesting experience also for them, because as a museum, we are able to create another kind of awareness, because as a cultural institution addressing issues of sustainability at that time was also quite new. And so we could reach other public. So this was also very interesting experience. So yes, question is very important. No solution, no one solution, but every exhibition, every project, you have to try anew, and to really, you have to think not about, oh, I'm the super curator, but okay, I want to address the public. What could the public be interested in? So, yeah, but it's difficult. You never know.
Maybe I can add another question. There is also, this is what was also the meta question of what I asked just to Barbara. How is this about the generation gap? Is there something about the generation gap under curators? How are you seeing this? Do young curators, as you in fact are in your career, yes, you are, often a young curator. How is this? How many possibilities are there? And then connected to, in the beginning, you said something about networking with curators from other museums. Is there a kind of bonding going on? And how does this work? I mean, museum is a far away abstract institution. Give us some inside information. How does this work?
I would definitely say that there is a gap between generations, and I have the feeling that, yeah, so I'm not that young, so I don't feel as a young curator. And I think I grew up with this generation of curators, with these so-called star curators. Our big idol, okay, it's 20 years ago, our big idol was Harald Seemann at that time. We all wanted to become another Harald Seemann, or a female Harald Seemann, because this was absolutely new. And I have to say, I was really happy that I had the chance to work with a curator like Jean-Hubert Martin, a French, very well-known French curator for this Africa Remix exhibition. And I can tell you also a little story like you did, Barbara. When at that time I was working in Berlin in the Museum for Contemporary Art, and I was about to go to my to my new job in another city, so in Düsseldorf. And I told my colleagues, oh, I'm now going to work for an exhibition on contemporary art, African art. And then my colleague said, oh, you know, switching to ethnological art. So, and here again, we are what you mentioned, Barbara, about hierarchies. So there's a lot going on hierarchies. Yeah. And so this is me working in the Museum of Decorative Arts. So we are at the lower end of the hierarchy in Germany. I think in America and in England, it's a bit different, but in Germany, it's still the classical academic tradition. So you have the fine arts, you have painting, and even sculpture is more difficult. So painting and fine arts, and then and at the end you have design. And when I'm doing design exhibitions and I want to do an exhibition with a designer, they ask me, the administration asked me, I have to provide them with free, I don't know the English word, Vergleichsangebote. What is this in English? So I have to bring free proposals for free designers. And I think, sorry, and designer is not in German, it's the word Dienstleister. And now I use the word artist because I'm so tired of, and I think the younger generation, to come back to your question, is more easy with these hierarchies. So they try to eliminate these hierarchies but I would say also my generation and the older ones, it's really like.
Yeah, this is really exciting because it's almost as if it's come full circle, that actually utilitarian art has now melded into what we call social practice. So the issues that are happening in a lot of contemporary art that are working with environmental or political activities that are community-based, working with food, like you were showing some of those artists, all that has to do with actual utilitarian functional processes. So it's almost as if it's come full circle, and that the art object, whatever that is becoming passé. I know Museum of Modern Art in New York is having a really difficult time with their mission. And they're actually having exhibitions that are breaking down their own museum, because as the modernist trope ends and is disqualified or challenged as an institution, they're really trying to figure out, where do we belong in this dialogue of modernism after modernism? So it's exciting, I think, because like even politically, we're re-examining all our histories. Who wrote our histories? It wasn't her, we know that, for example. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time for institutions who have curators like you. Yeah.
But Barbara, from your own professional praxis, in the introduction, Jörg also told us that you come from fashion originally, or you have been involved with fashion. Still, there is this kind of difference. I don't want to have this vertical dividing of things. But when you make something that has a statement on sustainability within utilitarian art, then if it is fine, you don't even notice it, but because it functions, and then you know that it is sustainable. If you work in art, on the other hand, then you make a statement and then you say, okay, let's change this. How is this in, because at the moment, the most projects that you have been presenting is free art, so to speak. It's not applied art. It is more difficult to make a statement in applied art that goes beyond a good application of materials, a good handling, good sustainability, that kind of stuff. Is it more difficult? Is it more easy to make an artistic statement with the sculpture, or how is this?
Well, thank you for the question. It's that's the challenge, and I think that's why I started off having the clothing line as a way to support myself to get through school. My grandmother was an immigrant. She came from Bohemia, and she was a seamstress, as our family was. So that was a natural way for me to make a living. But I realized as my business had more and more success, that it became a matter of capital. So I had an issue with the economics of it, that to keep continuing, I would have to make certain choices about labor, about all those things you talked about sourcing, about environmental impact. Even though it was 100% organic cotton, it was still very much, bleached and mass produced. So all those issues weighed heavy on me, which is why I eventually was able to start selling my artwork, luckily, and I could live off of that. But it was always supposed to be a temporary thing. It ended up being 10 years, but it took me a while to make that transition. But I think obviously as an artist, we have more freedom to express, to say what we want to say, but with every freedom, of course, comes more responsibility. So it's I wouldn't say it's easier. I'd say it's more challenging in some ways, but I wouldn't change it personally. I think we have a larger palette. I'll put it that way. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes, I forgot to switch on my mic. Yes, it does. But in the end, the responsibility to society isn't any different at all. Yeah.
I think that's a personal choice for every artist or institution, how much responsibility we have. Hopefully we do, but not everyone does, as we know.
Okay, I've been checking the chat. There are not any more questions coming. So if anybody wants, this is going to be your last chance in the next, let's say, 3-4 minutes.
I have a question to Barbara, unless not anybody else has. So regarding your the place in Bohemia, so I was very happy to read that you installed that place and you offer. So I wanted to ask you about that place and also what kind of opportunities students have, how can they get there and what can they do there and learn there. So
well,
can you tell us a little bit?
Thank you for that. I'll write our website there. Sometimes I switch hats too much, but definitely part of my practice is running this art center in Czech Republic. We started 20 years ago, and it came out of the events of 1989 after the changes politically. So I was interested in how artists, as former Soviet bloc countries, were able to create work without a market. So that's what took me over there, and I made many friends. And so that kind of organically developed into this this art center, which is based on environmental issues and sustainability. We have an organic farm. We do study abroad programs with different universities and institutions. We have an artist in residency program. So people can find us. I just put up the website and you're welcome to come or bring your students. We have a really great international group there every year. And this summer we've got a great workshop. I'll just give you a little plug on a Native American woman, Denise Davis, who's from a Maidu, California tribe here, is going to be teaching basket weaving. So it's a really great opportunity. All these things we're talking about today, it's an object, it's a process, it's about the environment and in the environment, and it's all organic. So she's a wonderful teacher and we're really lucky to have her this summer. So everybody's invited to come.
Thank you.
That's my other hat.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are not any more open questions, I have a special request still for our audience, because I think this is our 4th or 5th online lecture that we're doing. And I think it would be very nice for Claudia and Barbara if all the participants would just for half a minute, let's say the last part of this this meeting, switch on their cameras, because until now we can only see your names, and it would be so super if we can see all of you. So please switch to gallery mode. You can do this in the top right button and show your faces to the two lecturers, because they have been working really hard tonight. And as you can see at the moment, we have 152 participants here, minus 2 moderators and 2 lecturers, so that is still 148 people in the audience. So you can switch on the left to the other 6 pages and see all the people who are participating. I think it's, yeah, one of the things we should take care of in these online times, that we keep on meeting and do not only see black squares with names in it. So yeah, so good to see you all.
Sweet, very sweet. Oh, hi everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Okay, I think a special thanks again to Barbara Benish and Claudia Banz, not only from me, also from you, Jörg. I think it was for us a special occasion to have the 2 of you. I think, as Jörg already said in the beginning, he is the interdisciplinary professor for art education in our department. There are, of course, more colleagues who integrate the issue of art. We in Ida Oberstein are offering a bachelor and master degrees of fine arts. This also immediately includes this intersection with art. And we found out, as we changed or switched from arts to fine arts, that the students came to us and said, but if we are fine arts, can we also do an installation instead of a necklace? And we said, yes, of course. So it really, what you just said, Barbara, it really opens up also a perspective if you go beyond your applied borders. And that was the reason for Jörg and me to make this special choice, and also this conscious choice for 2 people who are involved with art on another level as we do in the design area, not a higher or different level. And this is why we chose to invite you for these 2 lectures. And I think I also speak for Jörg when we say that it was very exciting to bring the 2 of you together, because it's a very good mixture of positions and all the things that we heard today. To conclude the meeting tonight, I've been asked by the organizations and the deanery to already introduce not only the meeting tomorrow at the Museum of Claudia Banz, but also next Monday there is going to be a next meeting organized by the fashion department with the theme Slow Fashion. You will find links in your emails. It's going to be exciting, so please be there. And the last sentence from my side is also a big, big thanks to the team of the deanery, Shelale Franger and Susanne Kremer, and of course what is his name? The host, Moritz. Yes, Moritz is the host, the man with the universal power. He switches us on and off. Thank you all for doing the techniques and all the preparations. This is a lot of work in advance. And as far as I'm concerned, everything worked very good today. And this is a special thanks to all the people behind the scenes as well. Okay, thank you very much, and hope to see you somewhere in the next lecture. Jörg, last word.
Yeah, I have nothing to add, just also to say thank you to everybody, and yeah, that we created this very interesting, also, yeah, difficult evening. I think it's really difficult questions we ask, but I hope there was also a positive path shown to all these hard questions. So thanks, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And you're invited to come to Berlin. It's not that far than traveling to Los Angeles. So. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for all your work.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye bye.